Hey everybody, Tal back with you today. I was so disappointed by Game 4 of the World Championship Series that I felt like I needed to cleanse the palate. Just do a quick chess cleanser. And who better to cleanse just from hyper-technical, slightly boring play than the games of Mikhail Tal. So we're going to dive back into our series. This is a fairly well-known game. This is one of his earlier calling cards when in his youthful levity, when he was starting to mature into a much more well-rounded and savage attacker. Some of you have undoubtedly seen this game before. I'll try to be a little bit creative with my commentary, but it's a fairly well-known game. This is Mikhail Tal is black here. He's playing against Bukhuti Gurgenidze, famous Georgian, pretty sure he was a grandmaster, several-time Georgian champion. So I want to preface this game by saying that Gurgenidze was a fantastic player. He knew how to play chess entirely well. He was white here, d4. The Benoni. So once again, as a refresher in our series on Tal, he really should be known more. His reputation as a theoretician should be stressed more when people speak about him. He more or less essentially invented the modern Benoni through some theoretical work, but mostly just his own praxis. Before he came along, it was labeled under like irregular opening sometime. He sort of forged it into a weapon all by himself. The other approach, this would be the Benko Gambit. The time had not yet come for that. I mean, Pal Benko didn't really start playing this until, I think, the early 70s. But this is one of the true positional pawn gambits. But the Benoni, it's not a pawn gambit, much more aggressive than the Benko. C3. Knight f3. So this is a much more old-fashioned and slow approach. Of course, since Tal was essentially making this opening up, there wasn't any theory in this opening. So both sides were sort of feeling out for the best way to play in this position. Modern praxis recognizes the most dangerous approach. Bishop b5 check. This is known as the Taimanov. I've seen it also called the flick knife. I prefer Taimanov just because he was an excellent chess player and excellent pianist and worth memorializing. This is the most dangerous approach against the Benoni. It's one of the reasons a lot of people only commit to playing the Benoni when white's committed to playing knight f3. So somewhere back here, let's say something like this happens, e6 instead. If white had played knight f3 to avoid the Nimzo, then some people are comfortable going into a Benoni, because that dodges the Taimanov attack. There's some other move order related issues, but that is the most dangerous way of playing against a Benoni. Knight f3, it doesn't scuttle white's hope of an advantage, but black has to worry a lot less in this line. Bishop e2, so this is a classical approach. There's one more dangerous line for white. h3 is another modern line that's fairly dangerous. There's a huge ream of theory branching out from here. From what I can tell, current modern praxis seems to say that black is okay, but it takes a lot of memorization to prove it. Which, if you're playing the Benoni, you'd like to think you're playing an aggressive, romantic opening where you're forging forth by yourself, the skull and crossbones waving high from the mast. But it's just a lot of theory memorization, which isn't terribly fun, but that's modern chess for you. But Bishop e2, again, this doesn't necessarily scuttle white's hope of an advantage, but it certainly worries black a lot less. Castle. Rook e8, this is the most popular move here. Bishop g4, in some ways this is a more logical Benoni move. In this structure, this bishop on c8 doesn't really have a role. It doesn't have a clear place where it makes sense at all. So a lot of times, if allowed, black will try to trade this bishop off for either the knight on f3 or white's own light square bishop on e2. That's one other boon to the modern system with h3 and bishop d3 is that you immediately cut out bishop g4, which means black is more likely to be stuck with this light square bishop. But bishop g4 is another way, just an example of how that can go. Take. And I personally think black is okay. I played the Benoni a decent amount when I was growing up. Of course, I'm too old and gray to play the Benoni now. But I personally think black is doing okay. When you look at any King's Indian or Benoni position with an engine, it's going to hate black's position, so it's harder to analyze these sorts of positions with the engine, because you're always going to get back black is positionally losing. But just from my experience with Benoni, black is doing okay here. But rook e8 makes sense as well. Knight d2, so this cuts out bishop g4 and it reinforces e4. That's definitely the best move. Knight a6, this is another common Benoni maneuver. So this knight is headed for c7, where it'll help support the key b5 push. In this position, white has a central pawn majority in the king side, or in the center, and then black has a pawn majority on the queen side. So each side's plans in this position are sort of written in the stars by the pawn structure. White's going to look for his e5 pawn break, and black's going to look to expand on the queen side with b5, c4, and so forth. The strategic timber of a position, your plans, is almost always determined by your pawn breaks and your pawn structure. So when you're learning an opening, aside from learning specific move orders, you have to learn what your pawn breaks are, what your pawn structure is going to be. So in this position, white's long-term goal is e5, and black's long-term goal is to get those queenside pawns moving however it can. Rook e1, a modern praxis has moved away from this move. f3, this is very logical. It basically fireproofs the entire center. There's no way black's breaking through this now. Modern theory goes knight c7, a4, so very logical move, preventing b5 more or less permanently. b6, so it's not the only move, but the logic behind this move is that if black plays a6, white will immediately immobilize black's pawns with a5. So then this one queenside pawn is holding up these two right here. It's not so simple in this particular position, but in general. So the idea behind b6 is that black will play b6, then play a6, rook b8, and then push for b5. So in this particular position, a5 doesn't immobilize black's queenside pawns. It keeps them more mobile and intact. Rook e1, modern theory has moved away from this. In particular, which we'll see in this game, it undefends this f2 square, which in some positions turns out to be consequential. Foreshadowing. Knight c7, continuing the maneuver, looking to prepare b5 eventually. a4, b6. In this particular position, this probably isn't best. I prefer a6, h3, immobilize the pawns, but there is a downside to a5 in that. In bishop d7, white's lost the b5 square, so black can use the b5 square as a outpost for some of his pieces. Here he can play bishop b5, and again, trading that bishop off is often a goal, so you can play bishop b5 to get that bishop off the board. And black is doing fine. I mean, the engine hates black's position. Great move. Queen c2. This is very dangerous. There is the old saying that seems to be more popular in British chess and chess around the world, but it really should be sort of an anagram that you remember in any chess position. LPDO. Lapido. Loose pieces drop off. Queen c2 undefends this rook on e1. So suddenly, with a certain class of positions, black, let's say if this bishop moved to d3 on the next move, we can take on d5, that rook on e1 is hanging. As much as possible, keep all of your pieces connected. The tactics that suddenly randomly win a piece or a pawn or weaken your position usually, or sometimes, happen because your pieces aren't properly connected and there's just some randomly hanging rook on, say, e1. Here, queen c2, white didn't need to guard this pawn more, and it disconnects this queen from the rest of the position, especially the white king side. More foreshadowing. Better was just h3, cuts out any things hopping into g4 permanently. And just an example of how this can go. White's quite happy here. These pawns here at this point are a little bit overextended. Knight g4. So this is what you would typically term as coffeehouse chess, and this is sort of emblematic of the early Tal. You can see he was sort of thrusted around looking for his own particular style, and he was guided by a constant yearning for aggression against the enemy king. Here it's completely unjustified. Rook b8 is the better move. just logically looking for that queenside expansion. And here, bishop a6, this is another idea behind getting b6 in, is that we hop the bishop out to trade it off for one of white's own minor pieces. And again, I think black is doing perfectly fine here, just from my Benoni experience. Black's going to get b5 in and continue to expand on the queen side. Typically, if black can get those queenside pawns moving successfully, he's never doing too badly. Knight g4. And this is where my qualification of Gurgenidze's credentials at the beginning, I want to reiterate. Gurgenidze was an excellent chess player. But this is back in 1957. No matter what field we're in, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. A master of today knows more about chess than Wilhelm Steinitz ever did. If you transported Wilhelm Steinitz from 1890 1888 when he was world champion to a top tournament today, he would just be ripped to shreds. He wouldn't draw a single game. We know so much more about chess now. So when we see particular moves from, say, the 40s and even the 40s and 50s from all-time greats, some of them just seem like, why did he play that? It's obvious that XYZ. It's only obvious to us because we had their games to learn from. So if you took, say, Mikhail Tal from 1957 and took him to a top tournament today, he'd get ripped to shreds. If you took, here's a hot take for you, if you took Bobby Fischer from 1972 and you took him to a top tournament today, he'd put up a fight, but he'd get beaten repeatedly just because we know so much more about chess, and people have gotten so much better at the game just from all the knowledge that we have. So that long preface, h3. Gurgenidze was a multiple Georgian champion, grandmaster. I think any player 2200 would just automatically recoil from playing h3. Even if they didn't see the sacrifice on f2, they would just feel something wrong about that move. And we would see just positionally, like, that's your bad bishop. You want to trade that off for black's active knight. This is just a natural move to any master nowadays. This is on the verge of winning for white. We're targeting this weak d6 pawn here. Bishop f4 is the immediate threat, which wins material or makes black's position completely terrible. And white's smacking through anyways. This is just a winning position for white. So a move that we see as completely ridiculous, and we can't understand why a very strong player like Gurgenidze would play, it only looks ridiculous to us because we had this game to learn from. I mean, everything gets better. Every field of knowledge has advanced in the past 70 years. So it is with chess. So h3, this is where you learn that these dark squares around a white king are about to get completely blasted apart. Knight x f2. This is as natural a sacrifice as you can see. And it's not even based on just a kingside attack. It's purely positional as well. Look at all these dark squares. They're completely blasted apart, and it's all because of that h3 move. Also harkens back to the earlier moves at rook e1 and queen c2. It just completely disconnected all these pieces guarding white's kingside. King x f2. This is a good example of how even older games, computer engines have completely changed how we look and analyze. So, just an explanation of my process. I keep my engine off when I analyze games, because I think that's just much more natural and better. And then I review my analysis with an engine afterwards, just to look for major errors and to make sure I'm not missing anything. Silly. So, when you look at this game with older books, you don't really see this as a mark of choice, but white actually has a big choice here. White can just play knight f3 and ignore the knight for now. This brings the dark square bishop back into the game, guards these g5 and h4 squares, so suddenly this knight is trapped. Now, black can win another pawn. This is more or less all forced. Black is up 2 pawns, but Stockfish thinks white's better. I mean, it's hard to ignore 3200 rated advice. I mean, I think it might be true. And this would sort of force us to completely reevaluate one of the classic games in which we built our understanding of chess. But computers have completely changed chess in that way. I certainly think White's initiative is worth something close to those 2 pawns, at least. Especially the fact that Black is missing his Benoni bishop. This bishop on f4 is just an absolute monster now. And neither of Black's extra pawns on f7 or b6 are making themselves felt. So taking at f2 is just sort of giving up. This allows Black to sort of sing his song exactly how he wants to. So what follows from Tal is just a completely classic display of attacking chess. So queen h4 check, bishop d4. Just look at these dark squares. It's not even like a savage sacrificial attack just yet. It's all based on this positional premise of how weak these dark squares are. And that's all part and parcel of White making that h3 move, moving the rook away from him, defending f2, moving his queen to c2 where it's completely disconnected from the king side. These dark square weaknesses all have a logical precedent. Knight d1, so passively defending, but now the pretty blow to break through. Queen x h3. Just absolute classic. It's the only move, because bishop x h3, rook a3, and suddenly White's able to defend decently. Get this rook lifted over to help keep things in order. Queen x h3, though, with the concrete threat of queen h1 mate. Bishop f3. Queen h2. This is actually very accurate from Tal. There's a chance for Black to go wrong here. Queen h4. And suddenly White's able to create a little hidey hole for his king on the light squares where Black has no influence at all. And suddenly White is actually holding. So queen h2 is much more accurate. Knight e3 was played in the game. If knight f2 to block the queen out from going to g1, this is more or less all forced. Bishop a6, so these bishops are just absolutely raking those horribly pinned pieces over there, plus we have rook e8 suddenly now. And then bishop c8, and then White's just completely pinned up. Bishop g4 is going to come. Black's down 2 pieces at this point, but the rook on a1, the bishop on c1, they play no role. Black has a temporary advantage of material firepower, and it's completely decisive. So knight e3 was played, and now a very logical move from Tal, f5. Never forget about your pawn breaks. Your pawn breaks are always going to be the engine and the dynamo of your play. Here, f5 is just logically ripping open the lines headed towards a White's exposed king. And again, it's remarkable how this attack from Tal, it's not some constant sacrificial tempo attack. It's just a very logical positional attack. The dark squares are emaciated, so Black's able to permanently occupy them, and then Black just logically opens up lines headed towards the weakened king side. Knight dc4, f takes, just opening the lines up. Bishop a6. Just finish your mobilization. The games of the greats, you always notice that they always finish their development. They don't have pieces like a rook on a1 just sitting there doing nothing. Tal just finishes his mobilization, gets that bishop to work. 3. Rook e5, rook f8's fine. That's another way of doing things. Then rook e8, sort of proactively preventing king e2, moving back as a queen x g2 check. And then g5. Very simple. And then g4, and this is just a very cute little move. Black's just going to play g3, queen h1 check, queen x g2, breaking through. But rook e5, I will say, is simpler. This is the much more natural move. And that's why it's simpler, just because it gets the last piece into the attack. Again, the greats never let their pieces just sit around. They always finish their mobilization. Knight x d5, and White's just completely pinned up. And nothing of White's position can move. If the knight takes, just queen g1 mate. So the bishop takes. king e2, but just stepping into another pin. You'll notice that black's not even down material at this point. He's got 3 pawns for the piece, but the material count doesn't matter here. And white finally resigned. After queen takes, and checkmate. So, very emblematic attack from Tal, and very thematic of the Benoni. And this is when you started to hear the first whispers of a Tal attack coming out of nowhere, which is complete nonsense. Again, that myth of the Tal hypnosis or the Tal attack. First off, knight g4 is just a poor move. If white had just defended properly, he has a winning position. And Gurgenidze was a strong player. It's just defensive technique wasn't that high at that point. People had just gotten used to thinking in very general categories. Concrete play had sort of fallen out of fashion. Tal was really the first top player to come along that thought concretely again, that just move by move bombarded his opponent to force him to defend, not on general principles, but just by constant calculation. And then this knight xf2 blow, it's not even unsound, it's just completely based on the logical exploitation of white's weak and dark squares. And playing a position 2 pawns down for positional compensation. I mean, that would be completely unheard of in that point in chess history. Gurgenidze was a strong player, but he just ran into an absolute tornado in this game. And it's completely expected that he got blown apart. So, beautiful Tal game. Tomorrow we're going to continue with our examination of the World Chess Championship match, but I'll be sprinkling in Tal games here or there to help cleanse the palate from any boring games we come across. So, my name is John. I'll see you tomorrow.